Hello and welcome to the Week in Nintendo. This is GVG's Nintendo-focused podcast. I'm your host this week, Steve Bowling, and I'm joined by Daniel Alba this week to talk about all things Nintendo. How are you doing, Daniel?
Doing good. It's been quite the eventful last couple of weeks for various reasons, but I'm glad to be here today. This is the first time we're doing just me and you, Steve, so I'm excited to get this one rolling.
Yeah. It's always been some variation of like me and Brandon, but we had, last week we had extra episodes, so we did one with just John. This week it's just you and me. I'm excited for us to talk about it because one thing I've learned over the years working with you is that we have pretty similar taste in games, and I don't think a lot of people would expect that based on how different we are in other ways.
Yeah, you really solidified that when I heard how deep you were into Metaphor last year. That was I was just keeping up with you going through that the entire way, and I'm glad you enjoyed it as much as I did. It sounds like.
Yeah, I absolutely adored Metaphor. It's a funny thing. I talked about this on the previous episode of the Week in Nintendo with John, but I've almost found myself in a Persona 5 situation with Metaphor, in that I have completed it and I desperately want to do New Game Plus just to play it again. But now I have like a strong feeling, based on nothing, that it'll be on Switch 2, and now I just want to wait to replay it there.
It makes so much sense for Atlas to release these titles like Metaphor, like Persona 3 Reload, which weren't available on the Switch originally, but with given the power, what we're seeing capable of the Switch 2, that's more likely than ever.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to see a lot of third-party stuff that just wasn't possible on the Switch, just kind of come day and date with the Switch 2. I suspect there will be a strong third-party lineup. But before this, we talked about Switch 2 a lot last week, so let's shift gears into kind of sort of new stuff. This week on the channel, we had a review for Donkey Kong Country Returns, which John was pretty brutal on. Like he gave it a 5. I was a bit surprised.
Yeah, I've seen so many mixed comments on this game, and ever since it was first released, people were like, "Is this really in need of an HD remaster?" The price point was another thing to talk about, and the overall performance of the game too. And John was sharing little visuals here and there, just little comments on it, and I'm also surprised that it was as low as a 5. But I think everything that was presented was justified in the end.
Yeah, I agree largely with John's arguments. He makes a compelling argument for why it should be where it is. That being said, I'm not the world's biggest Donkey Kong fan, so I picked this up without having played the Wii or the 3DS versions, just as, kind of a stopgap until something bigger comes out. And I've been enjoying it. I think there is an enjoyable game underneath it. I think that the core is fairly well realized. I'm not the biggest Tropical Freeze person, though this game kind of makes me want to try Tropical Freeze. So I think it's good if you're not really into Donkey Kong and this is your entry point, which is kind of what it's serving as for me. But I do see, like, when they're put side by side, I do see the differences, like in particular the load times, which looked really rough. Like I think the load times on the Switch version are triple those of the Wii, for instance.
Yeah, that's kind of shocking to me, how much worse that is. I'm someone that did play Tropical Freeze first before DKC Returns. So I really enjoyed Tropical Freeze when that came out on the Switch, specifically when it was released on Switch. And so I've been curious to try this one as well. But yeah, it's all the mixed opinions that has me kind of holding off for a moment, aside from the fact that there's so many other games to play at the same time right now.
Yeah, it's not like we're hurting for stuff to play.
Yeah.
I do wonder if it's like, I kind of see this as, at $60, it is really hard to justify because there are better games out there for your $60. We were just talking about Metaphor, which is a game that for $10 more you can play one of the best games to come out in many, many years. So I do think it's interesting, but I just want to note I have been playing it and I'm actually having a lot of fun with it. So I think if you're divested from the previous versions and you don't have that experience, you might have a better I don't want to say a better take on it because that's not what I mean, but you may have a better time with it than say John did, because John is like a Donkey Kong head, like he knows everything. So I think that, you know, he's able to point those things out a bit more aptly than most would. So, you know, if you're like me and you're a very casual Donkey Kong enjoyer, then maybe this is a good option for you. But it is, I would still say maybe wait for a sale. Like it's better cheaper. But I know, Daniel, you've been playing something different to me. What have you been up to?
So leading up to another game, during our little break towards the end of the year during our holidays, I finally got a chance to play a game called Ender Lilies. It's Ender Lilies Quietus of the Nights, which is a really cool looking Metroidvania. It's a really like dark fantasy kind of setting in which you play as a frail little girl, the white priestess. Her name is Lily, who can't speak, and she wakes up next to an Umbral Knight, who is pretty much one of the only characters that actually talks and guides you through the game. And throughout this Metroidvania, your abilities are essentially invoked by these knights. And so whenever you attack, the knight appears behind you and slashes, for example. And your character is very frail. Like you'll die in like a couple of hits or so. And so it's a really tough it's a tough game. It can be really challenging in its boss fights. And the story is very much like the whole world is like ruined by this blight, by this rot that affected everybody. And so throughout the course of the game, you're kind of learning a little bit here and there what happened to this world through leftover notes, through knights that got totally like messed up by the blight, because your white priestess can purify these souls, and that's how you get them on your side. And it's just a cool premise. And I wanted to play this because leading up to this week was the release of the sequel, Ender Magnolia. And that game, I think it takes the aspects of the Metroidvania that they set up with Ender Lilies, and I think it really refines it to a really amazing degree. It feels very nice to play. It feels great. It's the same kind of premise where your character is very small and frail, and you have other characters that are fighting for you. In this case, it's homunculi. So the story is very different. There is little references to the first game, but this is very much like its own thing. I don't think you really need to play the first one to understand Ender Magnolia, but it feels really good. I feel like this game might be higher on the list for me than Hollow Knight, as far as like art style, design. There's a lot more of a narrative in this game, and I just really been having a good time with it. Have you heard of the Ender series, Ender Lilies or Magnolia?
I have. So I first encountered them, ironically, with you. I don't think it was your first time, but I encountered the series at PAX when we were there, because they were showing off Ender Magnolia at PAX West last September, when you, Ash, and I were at the show. So I've taken an interest in it, but admittedly, I've not started playing Ender Lilies. I saw it when I was on PSN yesterday as like a free game. So I think I may play it there. But I'm very excited to try the series out, because what I played of Ender Magnolia at PAX was cool. Like I really thought it was a very interesting take. So it's interesting to hear you say that, especially about Hollow Knight, because I've been recently digging back into Hollow Knight to try to beat it because of a rumor. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Hollow Knight fan base is understandably a bit wound up. And so it's just in a weird situation where we've got this we've got this picture of cake that has driven the fan base into a frenzy. Daniel, why don't you break that down for us?
So the rumor with this whole entire ordeal with Hollow Knight and with Silksong is a developer had changed their profile picture to a picture of cake. And this specific cake, people reverse searched it, and they found that I think it was the date that this cake was uploaded was an April 2nd. And so people were thinking, oh, April 2nd. That's when the Switch 2 like official direct is going to happen. Is something going to happen on that day? And people were obviously up in arms, just wondering, they're hungry for anything that they can get. In this case, it was for cake, apparently. And so when this started going off online, that a developer of Team Cherry came out and said, no, this has nothing to do with it. It's not related to Silksong or anything of the sort. But now that idea is in everybody's heads. Now people are just clamoring for any kind of news for Silksong at this point now.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Like, I've been trying to finish Hollow Knight, and it's really tough because, like you said, Hollow Knight doesn't have like a lot of narrative. So it's very hard if you put the game down to figure out where you were and what you should be doing. But I've been making incremental progress from my save from like when the game came out. But yeah, I have to wonder, like, I don't want to hold out hope for Silksong any longer. Like, I feel politically like they owe it to Xbox because Xbox said, very famously that Hollow Knight was coming out in the next 12 months, and it's been like 2 years since then. So I'm sure someone at Xbox has told Team Cherry that they owe them like the rights to the release date reveal or something, because they got egg on their face from that. But I mean, I also wouldn't be surprised if Silksong was the big indie for the Switch 2 launch. The Switch had Shovel Knight, and there's not another Shovel Knight on the horizon as far as we know. Silksong is kind of the high profile indie that has a lot of hype around it that people are waiting for.
Yeah, I have slowly just kind of shoved Silksong to the back of my head. The less I think about it, the least I'll be disappointed when it doesn't show up at the next direct or showcase or whatever have you. But yeah, it's still something that I'm hoping that the fans see this. I still want to play Silksong. I loved Hollow Knight for what it was, and Silksong is one of those games that it's just in the ether. Like, is it in development? Was it canceled? Is it coming? I'm glad there was at least something stated that the game is coming eventually. That's pretty much the only scrap of information that we've gotten on this game until then. But you're right, with the Switch 2 coming, there's not really like an indie title that's going to be leading the charge for this for a new console release the same way that Shovel Knight did. So if they wanted to wait until then, I wouldn't be surprised. But as far as like, waiting for this new title, people are exhausted. They want any kind of news to confirm that this game is still in development and not just, vaporware at this point.
Yeah, historically we get a lot of I hear a lot of indies tell me that their games perform vastly better on Switch than they do elsewhere. It's just not for whatever reason people like to play indie games on handhelds, and I personally think that's because indie games, broadly speaking, are smaller in scope and thus are more suited to portable play. But it's an interesting thing where I can tell you from all the developers I've spoken to over the last 8 years that the Switch has been on the market, I've heard overwhelmingly that they find, their greatest 2 points of success are Steam and Nintendo. That PlayStation and Xbox don't really offer them the same return on investment for porting the game that either of those two other platforms do. So I could see, from a financial perspective, it would make sense for Team Cherry to want to kind of hitch their wagon to the Switch 2 if they can, especially because, and I'm sure, anecdotally, you see this too, Daniel, when a new console comes out, spending tends to go way up. Like if you're buying that console, you probably spend more on that one day than you will on any other day in the console's lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, people just want to have games to play on their shiny new console, and that's something I've done with the Switch. I've done it with previous consoles. I'm going to probably do it with the Switch too, given that there's probably going to be a lot to release in that window at the very least. And having that first that first day, that first week, even that launch window will definitely help sales if they come in that time. So if they're waiting for that points, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't blame them for waiting for that window to happen.
Yeah, I think it's the smartest way to go for them personally. But of course, if they've said they're not doing that, then I have to trust that they're telling the truth. I mean, I guess we'll have to see. But there's one last Switch 2 thing that we should probably mention, and that is the fact that The Switch 2 experience registration is about to end. So if you want to play Switch 2 early, you've got, as of the recording of this, if you're watching on Patreon in our Winner's Circle, you're watching this Friday the 24th. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the 25th. You have either 2 or just 1 day remaining to register for those. Now, I don't know about you, Daniel, but I registered for the very first appointment in both New York and LA. Just going to try to get to one.
Yeah, that was quite the bloodbath when they opened, because everybody, there was like a Discord group I'm in right now, and everyone was trying to get in. They were refreshing like crazy. The site was getting so much traffic. You got in and you were just kind of clicking, hoping that it would go through. It's kind of funny looking back now, because I went again like 3 days later to apply for the New York location. It went just fine, because we have a whole week to apply for this raffle selection. So we don't even know if we're going to get in or who's going to get in.
Yeah.
Maybe one of us, maybe none of us, or all of us.
It's an interesting situation because, like you said, it may very well be just one of us. It might be none of us. It's random. Even if you were one of the first through the proverbial door, then that doesn't guarantee you the opportunity to go. And I mean, so it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. I managed to get in when it first opened through just sheer force of will. Like I kept doing it and it kept erroring out. And eventually while I was still trying, I got an email saying that I had gotten my registration through. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll stop. And then like you, Daniel, several days later, I registered for LA, just figuring that is closer to me and easier to attend. And that one went through no problem. The website was working just fine. I can't imagine how many people are trying to register for these events.
I feel like the earliest dates, like the one I did the very first one for New York as well, but I feel like those first dates are going to get the most people trying to get into them. So for LA, I did like a random time, in the middle of the day on Saturday. I'm just like, maybe that gives me a better chance. Who knows?
But it's going to be interesting because at that point, presumably, it happens just 2 days after the April 2nd Direct. We'll probably know all the details that we need to know by then. How the OS looks, whether it's got built-in voice chat, whatever that little C button does. Mm-hmm. I imagine Nintendo will take the wraps off of all of those things, especially considering people will have their hands on the console just 2 days later. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if media, and again, we don't know anything. I want to be clear about that. Nintendo has invited us to previews in the past. I have no clue if they're going to invite us to check out the Switch 2, but I actually think that around the time the Direct happens, select media will have already played it and will have like articles or videos going up around the same time. Not us. we at least not as of yet. We don't know anything.
We'll get like little invites to PAX, and that's really the most that we've gotten in the past. But we're still happy to check it out if you want to invite us, Nintendo. We're not against the idea. If you need more people
Nintendo,
to check this out.
If you want to let us play the Switch 2 early, we're keen. Now, I will say part of me wonders, though, because, this is a very similar playbook to 2017. And when Nintendo had their Switch presentation, they then had like hands-on events. And I did go to those and they were after the fact. So I don't know. Maybe I could be wrong on that, but it'll be interesting to see nonetheless. Either way, I'm going to try to get out and play it early. Hopefully I win that lottery. There is one other Direct that is rumored to be on the horizon, and it comes from an astonishingly reliable person as of late, that being Nate the Hate, who correctly nailed the date of the Switch 2 reveal, much to Nintendo's ire, I'm sure. He's also leaked last week that there will be a final Switch 1 Direct, and that will be happening in February, which as of the recording of this is a week away. So no specific date within February, but I think it's a safe bet. I feel like Nintendo probably can't be completely dark until April, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think we've been so focused and locked in on the Switch 2 news that we forget that traditionally there's a Nintendo Direct in January or February every year. And so, I mean, this lines up already. And I think there's still going to be games coming out for the Switch One. If anyone out there thinks that the Switch One is just going to stop releasing games once the Switch Two is out, they are very mistaken, in my opinion. There's still going to be games coming out for the Switch One. There's still games that were developed way back, who knows how many years ago, that were meant for the Switch One, and those are going to be seeing a steady release even as the Switch Two is entered the markets. And as it was a way for the 3DS, there were a lot of titles that came out afterwards that unfortunately got kind of overshadowed by the Switch. So who knows what's going to happen with these titles? But if there is a direct for Switch One, this is the time to have it before Switch Two gets its limelight, because I mean they're not gonna project it as like this is the final Switch One singular focused direct. They're just gonna here's what's coming next for the Switch One, but that does seem very likely to happen.
Yeah, I think that it makes sense, especially with the knowledge that not everything, but most things on Switch 1 will play on Switch 2. I think that it doesn't really have the same, it doesn't lose the same impact that it would if it was, say, like Wii U to Switch, where you know that these games are not going to be playable on this platform that most of your fan base is waiting on pins and needles for at this point. I think that Nintendo is positioning themselves really well here, because what we're going to have is a spate of new games, and then presumably within 3 to 4 months you can just take those same games and play them on your shiny new things. So there's no rush to you don't have to get these out and beat them and then shelve them in preparation for a new console coming out. So I think that Nintendo is putting themselves in kind of a good space, because also with 150 million plus consoles out there, who knows how many people are not going to upgrade right away, right? I think the rumor is that Nintendo's producing 20 million Switch 2s for the first year on the market. That would cover only 1 out of 8 that's out there right now. So, you're talking about a huge chunk of your player base staying behind, assuming you sell out all the units that you make. So I think it makes sense to keep producing Switch games, keep the system viable for as long as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if they price cut the Switch to make it even more affordable for people who just want to get their feet wet with the ecosystem, like people who didn't buy a Switch 2 and just kind of want to see what it's all about, picking up a Switch 1 at, say, like $149 or $199 if you're talking about like the OLED. And just continuing to release games, because we saw the PS1 and the PS2 getting games well into, their successors' life cycles. I think we'll see the same here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a unique situation, because I don't think we really had this since like the DS to the 3DS, where you can still play DS games on your 3DS, but then the 3DS is the shiny new console. Why not just get games for that one? But even then, like, we still need to know exactly what we haven't really seen what the graphic capability is, or what to extent the Switch 2 can provide, because we've only seen like 15 seconds of Mario Kart as of right now. The upcoming Direct on April 2nd is going to be very important for telling people, no, this is a completely new console. This is the new thing that you want to have. But for now, we're really just focusing on, Switch 1 up until that date. And I'm just really amused by the date actually being April 2nd and not the 1st. Because it's after the fiscal year has ended. So they're starting out the whole fiscal year with Switch 2. Guns blazing.
So what do we think will be in this February Direct? I think there's a lot of possibilities, but unlike most other Directs, there aren't any super solid rumors on the ground about Switch 1 stuff, and I think that's partially because everybody's been so focused on the Switch 2. Do you think this is going to be the Direct where we finally see the long-fabled Zelda ports? Speaking, of course, about Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD.
Oh man, this is like the last chance I see it happening. If it doesn't happen here, you're just gonna have to wait for it to be on Switch 2, I think, because it feels like it should have happened already so many times in the past. I think there was a year in which a Zelda game did not come out. Usually we traditionally have some kind of Zelda title release yearly. I think maybe that was like 2022 or something. And there was just an empty year in one of those years that could have slotted that right in. But if they're waiting for something in particular, I guess this is the moment. I think have it released now or never. I think.
Yeah, I think that it would be interesting, but there's a big part of me that also says Nintendo's going to wait and launch these alongside the Switch 2, Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD, just because you'd get more out of them, right, on that newer hardware. So you'd potentially be able to drive them at even higher resolutions. They would look even better. I think Wind Waker in particular would benefit from like, I would love to see 4K Wind Waker. Official 4K Wind Waker would be just chef's kiss, like the stuff of dreams. But there's something I'm much more excited for you to talk about. And that is that, of course, Zelda's been rumored a lot. But also in that same vein, we've been hearing rumbles about like a Fire Emblem remake of some kind. And I am very much like an Awakening forward Fire Emblem fan, so I don't have a lot of experience with the previous entries in the franchise, but you are the Fire Emblem master. So if there is a Fire Emblem on offer at this direct, what do you think it would be?
The one that I've heard the most news about, and the one that I feel like makes most sense anyways, would be Fire Emblem 4 that came out on the Super Famicom, Genealogy of the Holy War. This title has been it's pretty much been a fan favorite of the Japanese audience for the longest time. It's been re-released so many times via Virtual Console, the eShop, the Super Famicom Mini. The NSO is available on there right now if you speak Japanese and have that accounts. And this is the one that, taking after Shadows of Valentia, Fire Emblem Gaiden, this seems like the one that they will go with next, because we've had two completely new entries in Three Houses, in, I guess if you want to count Three Hopes as a Warriors game, but also Engage. And going into this one, I feel like something happened with the development cycles, probably also affected by COVID, that kind of jumbled up the release schedule of these. One of the main theories that I've had is that in Fire Emblem Engage, obviously it's a title that kind of celebrates Fire Emblem. You see all the main protagonists throughout the entire series. The first one you meet officially and can like equip and interact with is Sigurd, who is the protagonist of Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy of the Holy War. And I feel like that game probably should have released first, so that all audiences were more familiar with this character that was, only released in Japan. And so when Engage comes out, you're like, oh, it's this character that I'm familiar with now, that was from the most recently released title. But there's so many different theories of speculating like why this hasn't come out yet or why it's not here yet. But I feel like it's already done at this point. Engage was done for a long time before it was announced and released. And it's a very polished game. So I'm excited to see if when this title appears. If it doesn't appear now, it's probably going to be for the Switch 2. If it does appear very soon, then I'll be for Switch 1, which it probably will be because it's been in development for so long. But that's my whole take as far as like what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling with this potential unknown Fire Emblem title that they've been holding back for a while.
Interesting. So yeah, I'll have to, I'll have to defer to your knowledge on that because, like I said, I started on the DS with Awakening, which I love, and it definitely got me interested. I played Three Houses as one of my favorite Switch games of all time. Engage I thought was pretty good. For me personally, I liked the relationship management stuff in Three Houses a lot more. Mm-hmm. And I just love the narration. The narrator in that game it gives me life.
Yeah. I'm excited for people to play, if this comes out, if this becomes a thing, to play Genealogy, because if you thought a story from Engage was a little too goofy and silly with some of the characters, Genealogy is very grounded. It's a lot more serious. It's a bit of a dark story, and you will be able to see where games like Awakening took inspiration from, because in that game you have married couples that also have offspring that you play as well. But that's part of the main story that people will get involved with. But they'll definitely see the roots of games like Awakening if they play that. And I'm really excited to see when people will finally be able to experience that.
Nice. Yeah, I'm wondering how many big first party games Nintendo has left in it for the Switch 1. I feel like this is going to be kind of the last gasp of like really big high production value titles from Nintendo for their, you know, aging console, because it stands to reason that most of their development efforts are now over on the Switch 2. They're finishing up those games like that Mario Kart that we saw. You know, I presume there's a new 3D Mario that I wonder, and this is probably a great jumping in point. Do you think, Daniel, that Switch 2 launch titles will be cross-platform? Do you think that they will have Switch 1 versions tied to them?
Oh man, I feel like they want to get people on board with Switch 2 as fast as possible. And so, like, if you want to play the shiny new Mario game, you got to get it for Switch 2. But at the same time, like on the other side of the coin, of course, you have that install base for Switch 1, and it's like, do you give that up to have people just, oh, I can just play it on my Switch 1 console now? Or do you want to try and invite people, ease them into the Switch 2 atmosphere as well? That's tricky to consider what do they want to balance. But I do think they want to start pushing for Switch 2 so that more people can be slowly integrated into that, and to reach that 20 million estimated sales number.
I agree with you. I think that Nintendo finds themselves in an unenviable position because both PlayStation and Xbox caught a lot of heat for the first like 2 years of their generations, just being all cross-platform titles, you know, all cross-gen compatible stuff. You know, a lot of people complained that PS5 and Series X titles were held back by compatibility with the previous generation. So I think to avoid those, you definitely need those exclusives that only work on the current hardware. I think the Switch is going to find itself in a bit of a different position, and that they're going to basically out of necessity ignore the install base of the Switch 1, because I mean, the issue with the Switch 1, you know, the whole reason for the Switch 2 to exist is that the Switch 1 is no longer really capable of handling modern games. Like stuff that comes out now, you would have to significantly reduce the scope of it, or just reduce the visual fidelity to a point where the game really suffers from it to get them onto you know, the aging hardware. So I think that Nintendo in particular has also felt that, because, you know, we talked earlier at the top of the show about Donkey Kong Returns and it having some frame drops. And, you know, we've talked previously on the Week in Nintendo about just kind of this generation being Nintendo's, I don't want to say least optimized, but maybe poorest performing from a technical standpoint in terms of just frame rate issues and frame pacing and stuff like that. And it kind of speaks to the fact that even internally, Nintendo has found themselves kind of hamstrung by the hardware that they're working with. So I think that we are going to see just like new Mario Kart, new 3D Mario. These games are going to be fully on Switch 2 as exclusives. I think we are going to see a couple cross-gen games like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Definitely a cross-gen game. I don't see them launching the Switch 2 and being like, oh, that's Switch 1, you know, and it just runs through backwards compatibility. I think they'll have like a Switch 2 patch, or maybe even just a full-on Switch 2 version of the game, like they did with Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild. But I do wonder, you know, I think Nintendo is probably going to instead go the route of either, I don't know if it's going to be paid or if it's going to be free, but like patches for existing games. Do you think that they're going to charge for those patches, or do you think that Nintendo's going to give them to us out of the kindness of their hearts?
Oh man, for some reason, I think back to the days of when if you bought a game on Virtual Console for the Wii, you can upgrade it on your Wii U for like $1 or like $1.99, and sometimes it wasn't even an upgrade. It had that dark, murky filter on it that didn't really feel like an upgrade at all. That's like the only example I could think of where they offered like some kind of like upgrade if you've already have it somewhere else to bring it to a new console. And I don't know. It's weird to think of Nintendo as like charging something like that, because I don't think it's funny to think of it that way. In the kindness of their hearts, they might charge at least something to do that visual upgrade, for just have it, you know, perform as it would on the Switch 2. But I don't know. That's a hard one to consider. I kind of think that they would not do that sort of thing, and just they would just go the Nintendo way and just say buy it again for the Switch too.
Oh man, I hope not. The industry has changed a lot since the days of the Wii U. And I think that Nintendo, but the problem is, and you're right in this, Nintendo just kind of does their own thing. They go the way they want to go, and it is often objectively anti-consumer. Like it's not a good look to charge for, Super Mario Brothers 1 every single generation. But at the same time, I do feel that Nintendo has kind of hinted that maybe this won't be the case, just because we know that the Switch 2 uses the same eShop as the Switch 1. They've already confirmed that your digital purchases carry over to the Switch 2. And so, I mean, I could see them. I could definitely see them doing what Sony has been doing and saying, hey, for $10 more, you get a current gen patch for Breath of the Wild that makes it run at 60 FPS and removes load times and, maybe stuff like that, as a way to kind of get an ROI on the development work they had to put in, right? But I mean, I'm also with you in that I could equally see Nintendo saying this is Breath of the Wild Deluxe and it is $70 and you will buy it again.
Oh, no.
And I hope not. I hope not, because I don't know about you, but we talk often about Nintendo reveals and there being that other shoe that everyone is waiting for it to drop. And I could see I'm waiting for the Switch 2's other shoe.
Yeah, there's so many little things about this that I'm waiting to see the reveal of, and things that they honestly did. They only still have only teased. Like we only saw just the two Joy-Con gliding on the desk to see like, oh, by the way, this could have I mean, you saw the optical sensor, so it's going to be like the mouse kind of functionality, but we don't even get to see it in action yet until April 2nd, most likely. So there's a lot of unknowns with this console, but at least people are still, we at least got something to cling on to right now. And yeah, I'm very curious to see how they'll handle digital purchases like that, and potential upgrades in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the optical sensor, because I saw some people insisting that's an IR camera. And I was like, I don't know where folks are getting that one from. Like, it was in our comments quite often that people were saying it. Not only does the Switch 2 have an IR camera, but it has two of them, and that we're wrong about the optical sensors, and that frankly everybody's wrong about the optical sensors. I don't know, if you turn over a mouse and you look at that laser in the bottom of your mouse, please don't do it with the mouse on. But if you do that, it looks exactly like that, like 100%. So I don't believe that they've put an IR camera right there. It also wouldn't make sense for games like Ring Fit that the IR camera is where the Joy-Con docks onto the system. I just don't understand how that would be used in any game. I didn't personally see in the renders anything on the bottom of either Joy-Con, like a window on the bottom of either. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I think some folks are really holding on to hope that there will be IR cameras in the Joy-Con.
And I asked them why. We use IR camera for like, I can count all of them on both my hands, probably how many games that actually use the IR camera in a meaningful way. I also saw that as well. Like I have a Joy-Con right here. There was I think in that reveal, you could kind of see grooves along the bottom of the Joy-Con that kind of looks like it could be the IR camera, which is hard to tell because it's all in black. But I think that's just part of the casing itself. I don't think that's it at all. I think to help lessen the costs of this Joy-Con, which is probably already expensive to make it, considering it now has optical sensors in it, they're going to probably just tell you if you want to play any games with that uses IR, the few handful that do, just wirelessly connect your previous Joy-Cons to this. And if you want to play Ring Fit Adventure, you might have to go that route. But in the long run, I don't think it's going to make that much of a huge difference in as far as like what games you're going to be able to play on here. So I don't think the IR camera is there. I think that's an optical sensor. You look at the bottom. I have a mouse right here. Don't worry, I turned it off. This is exactly what it looks like underneath there. It's not out of focus, but that's what we got.
Yeah. I have a hard time believing anything else at this point. So before we close out this episode, we normally do a call for topics. As you all know, the Switch 2 reveal kind of happened out of nowhere at 5 a.m. So we all kind of rushed to get ready and put on the show. So that means we didn't get to do our mailbag for last week's episode or last week's episodes. So I thought we'd go back in time and use this as kind of a point to reflect on how we're feeling about the Switch 2 reveal a week on by answering your guys' questions. So let's go ahead, or actually, a week on. It's been 9 days. It just feels so much longer. It feels like forever. But let's go ahead and start. Kairuto writes, how do you feel about the initial Switch 2 trailer in comparison to the original Switch 1 trailer 8 years ago? And I think my feelings on this are exactly the same as they were the moment of. Switch 1 reveal trailer, infinitely better. Like, communicates far more about the system, showed a whole lot more. The Switch 2 reveal trailer, just not a lot to really talk about within it. I wish Nintendo would have gone further with it, but I get that this time they don't really need to communicate what a Switch is, so they just gave us the bare minimum.
Yeah, it was. I can see why they went this direction. It was way more important that going from the Wii U to the Switch, show us how is this console different. Show you pulling out the Switch so you instantly have it in handheld from the dock, showing the Joy-Con, showing you how you can just put it portably with the kickstand. There was that other attachment that didn't really, that car attachment that I don't think ever actually released, but still you could do that if you wanted to, playing it on an airplane, all the possibilities that you could. And the games, a lot more games on there as well that were just soft revealed that day. Just really showing you how much Nintendo had learned from the Wii U reveal that this is in fact a completely different console and that there is so much more to offer with this. And going to Switch 2, it was more so, it was very akin to like an Apple reveal of some sort, the newest iPhone. Like, this is exactly what we had before. There's some new peripherals for it. So there's some new functionality with it. But overall, this is pretty much what we have. The same, but better. Here's one game, and we're going to reveal more at a later date, but it is coming. And that's pretty much the angle that they went with this one this time.
Yeah, I can appreciate it to an extent. I wish we would have gotten more. And in that vein, Amagish writes, do you think the separation of a new console reveal and a new game showcase is a good or bad move on Nintendo's part? Why does Nintendo specifically always seem to keep more space between their console and game reveals than other gaming companies? So I don't necessarily think this was a good idea. I think that I understand why they did it from a business perspective. If there is a February Direct, then you don't necessarily want all of the potential spotlight. You don't want people saving all their money for this new thing and avoiding all your products that release in the interim. Sounds like Nintendo maybe has a slate of games to show us in February and they'd like us to buy those. But if you know exactly how many Switch 2 games are coming and when, you may not do that. Now, I suspect that genie is already out of the bottle for a lot of consumers. I know personally, I'm saving up to get my Switch 2 and definitely earmarking some funds for games as well, because there will obviously be games. So I don't know that it necessarily works the way Nintendo thinks it does, but I understand why they did it. I would have much preferred, as Daniel alluded to, that we at least got soft confirmations of more games than just Mario Kart. Everybody knew Mario Kart was coming. I would have loved to see something like, the Switch 1 reveal had a glimpse of Super Mario Odyssey in it. I would have loved to see something like that.
Yeah, that's the major gripe I have with it as well. That that's the one thing we were holding on to, right? Because we've had pretty much everyone except Nintendo leaked the Switch 2 before Nintendo did. But the one thing that they have close to their chest that isn't going to go leaking anywhere, at least at this point, is the games, the software. Because that's really much completely internal. That's on lockdown right now for all of them. And that's the one thing really that they have to surprise us with. So we did get Mario Kart, but beyond that, like, what is there to look forward to? We have to wait another 2 months and a couple of weeks to find out like what is coming for this console that can get us really excited, because everything else we kind of knew already. And obviously to Nintendo's dismay, that kind of took the air out of a lot of that for them and for us. Like we already kind of just watched the trailer and we're like, "Yup, that's what we saw already." But yeah, that's we're just waiting to see what can they surprise us with once these games get revealed.
Yeah, I think that's the key is we're kind of in a holding pattern now to see what we can manage here. In the I suppose we're kind of, there's just a lot of mystery around the console right now, more than there probably should be following the formal reveal. And like you said, Daniel, everybody showed us everything that Nintendo had shown, with the exception of Mario Kart, presumably 9, at the end of that. An interesting question from Eastman, however. Do you think third parties will be more on the ball with Switch 2 ports of new games, same day other platforms, assuming the system is able to run the games at a reasonable level? I think so. And the reason I think so is think about all the developers who initially flocked to the PS3 following the PS2's success. I mean, and the Switch is quite literally as successful as the PS2, if not more so. So I think you'll see a lot of developers who are betting on the Switch 2 being a similar success, seeing what Nintendo pulled off with the current model. Famously, the Switch 1 took a little bit of time to get some traction because people weren't sure that the approach was going to work, since the Wii U was a massive flop. So I do think we'll see games releasing day and date on Switch 2. I think that's what Nintendo wants. They don't want to be the platform where they get the games 6 months to a year later. They want to be, hopefully the platform where these games launch initially, and then they make their way to other stuff like the PlayStation 5.
Yeah, as we mentioned earlier in the discussion, this is Nintendo Switch has become the platform where a lot of these titles they sell the best, whether it's like indie titles, whether it's other titles as well. Just because the install base is so much larger than these other competitors, and so releasing first on Switch 2 seems like the right decision to make from a business standpoint, because you get more people on board with this first, or even if it's like a timed exclusive on Switch 2, you're going to get a lot more people invested in this and the console itself, if you were to do that, sooner than later. And yeah, I've just so many titles that kind of released on Sony and Microsoft's soft hardware that just kind of didn't really perform to their expectations. And I think certain ones would do way better if they had that availability for Nintendo, but which one just unfortunately couldn't provide before.
Yeah, it's going to be it's in an interesting position because obviously developers have likely been letting Nintendo know that they need something more for years at this point. Obviously, some of those developers have been in the know on Nintendo's plans. Like, they've been well informed about what Nintendo's up to. Nintendo clearly doesn't design their systems without showing them to anybody. Some of their closer partners, Square Enix, Capcom, these folks have seen and maybe even, advised on the hardware. We mentioned in a previous episode that Capcom in particular is the reason why the Switch had as much RAM as it did. Nintendo wanted to ship it with half that amount, and Capcom said, if you want Monster Hunter on here, you need to double it. And so Nintendo did. So I think that was, it's a good thing that third parties have done this, but I'm sure that in the same token, those developers that have those close ties with Nintendo have been telling them for a while now, if you want future games, you need to give us better hardware to make them on. And I'm sure that a lot of them would like their games to release on Nintendo first.
Yeah. There are so many of those titles that I think would just benefit overall being on Nintendo hardware. And as you said, there's some developers specifically that want you to just keep up with the times at this point. And given the specs that we've kind of had rumored already for Switch 2, it opens the door for so many more titles to appear on here year one, or even the launch window. There's a lot that I am hoping appears, given how much time has passed since some of these have released and people can finally play them, because sometimes they've just waited specifically for them to release on a Nintendo console. They don't have the means to get a PS5 or an Xbox Series. So having them be on Nintendo consoles finally just opens a lot of doors for people.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how the next year plays out. This is probably going to be 2025 is probably going to be the most exciting year Nintendo fans have had in the last 10, quite possibly. I'm very, very excited to see what happens. You know, I'm super hyped for a potential February Direct. We've got the Switch 2 revealed the Switch 2 Direct just 2 months after that. And if everything goes the way we want it to, Daniel, you and I might be in New York playing the Switch 2 just a couple days after even that. So it's a great time to be a Nintendo fan. But that's probably going to do it for this week in Nintendo. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're on YouTube, listening, if you're on our Patreon in our Winner Circle, or on Spotify or any of the other podcast services we publish this on, we appreciate your support. If you'd like to support the Week in Nintendo, you could do so by joining our Winner Circle over at patreon.com/gvgaming, where for as little as $5 a month, you can get each episode of the Week in Nintendo a day early, as well as a whole host of other benefits. Feel free to go hit up the page to check that out. There's a link in the description on YouTube. But that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you guys so much. I hope you're happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are. And I'll see you next time. Until then.
Till we meet again.